You are born the grandson of a Khan. By the time you are a man, your title is gone, but your bloodline isn't. I was not looking for this. I was tracing the administrative reorganization of frontier provinces in the expanding Muscovite state, specifically a series of land grants issued between 1587 and 1612. Routine documents, the kind that fill the back shelves of regional archives and rarely justify the journey. One entry stopped me. A family name appeared in the Razryadnaya Kniga, the military service registry in 1594, listed without origin, without explanation, and assigned a rank that should have taken 3 generations to earn. I went back to the previous volume. The name was not there. Then I went forward. By 1619, the family held a regional command. I set the volume down. I picked it up again. Here is what you already know. The Kremlin, the institution that survived Ivan the Terrible, Napoleon, the Bolsheviks, and a century of forced reinvention. Its administrative DNA, the ranked hierarchy of service, the tiered system of land for loyalty, is taught in every survey course on Russian history as a distinctly Muscovite achievement. What is less taught is that by 1556, when the service code formalized that hierarchy, the Muscovite frontier had spent 2 centuries in direct contact with the Golden Horde. The administrative vocabulary was borrowed. The scholars note it. They move on. The first anomaly is this. Genealogical records in Russian noble registries, specifically the Velvet Book, the Barkhatная книга, compiled under Tsar Fyodor III in 1682, show an estimated 156 family entries of demonstrably non-Slavic origin that achieved full service nobility status within a single generation of documented first contact with the Muscovite court, not across several generations. 1. Historians describe the process plainly. Steppe polities were defeated or pressured into submission, their elites absorbed into imperial service structures, their distinct identities gradually dissolving into the broader apparatus of the Russian state. The integration, they note, was generally smooth, a function of the Muscovite system's pragmatic flexibility toward useful military talent. Beside that explanation, place this. In 12 of those 156 cases, land grants were issued before formal submission was recorded. The document continues. I kept reading. In the Razryadnaya kniga for the year 1638, there is a single entry, subcollection 7, folio 214, listing a cavalry commander named Urasov with jurisdiction over a district in the Middle Volga region. What makes this entry unusual is not the name, though Urasov is a Nogai dynastic title with a documented genealogy stretching back to the 15th century. What makes it unusual is the jurisdictional boundary. The district assigned to him maps almost exactly, within a margin of 11 versts, onto the traditional winter pasturage territory his ancestor had administered under a completely different political system 80 years earlier, before the Muscovite expansion formally reclassified it as imperial land. The territory did not change. The paperwork around it did. This is not an isolated case of useful talent being rewarded. This is what happens when an expanding administrative framework processes absorbed elites and has no category for what to do with existing local authority. So it reissues that authority under a new designation and files it as a fresh grant. The pattern, once you see it, does not stop. In the cadastral surveys of 1646, land held by families of documented steppe origin in the Kazan and Astrakhan regions showed tax exemption classifications that did not correspond to any standard Muscovite service category. The exemptions were real. They were enforced. The legal basis for them was listed in at least 31 separate survey entries as by prior arrangement, po prejnemu. Prior to what? The surveys do not say. Administrative titles used at the Muscovite court through the late 16th century, including daruga, a Mongol term for a regional revenue official, appear in court documents as late as 1674. More than a century after the Khanate of Kazan fell, the office had been renamed. The function had not. Why does the Velvet Book record the ancestry of these families in abbreviated form when contemporaneous entries for families of Slavic origin run to 4 and 5 generations of detail? What body was responsible for verifying the prior arrangement classifications in the 1646 surveys, and where are its working records? When the Daruga title disappeared from official correspondence after 1674, what designation absorbed its function, and who held it? The record does not answer. The record, in several cases, stops mid-entry, not at the end of a folio, not at a chapter boundary, but mid-sentence, as though the clerk was interrupted, and the interruption was never resolved. In the Kazan administrative files held at the Russian State Archive of Ancient Acts Fond 1209, the Pomestnyi Prikaz collection, there are an estimated 340 documents from the period 1560 to 1700, catalogued as condition incomplete. That is not a metaphor, that is the inventory classification. Incomplete. The narrator is still calm, the archive is not. A boy stands in a wooden hall, watching his father kneel, not to a Khan, but to a Tsar. The father's hands are steady, but the ring he wears is older than the empire he now serves. Years later, that same ring is sealed into a document, his family name rewritten in Cyrillic, the past compressed into a single line of ink. In the Kazan Regional Cadastre of March 1583, that line exists. I have seen a transcription of it. The original is held in Fond 1209. The entry is 11 words long. Pull back far enough, and the hall in that image is not one hall. The same compression occurred in the Siberian administrative reorganization of 1629, when Buryat clan leadership structures were absorbed into the Tobolsk command hierarchy and reclassified as elected community offices, the election, in most documented cases, confirming the man who already held the authority. It occurred again in the incorporation of the Bashkir territories through the 1730s, where a series of agreements negotiated under Empress Anna formalized local administration in language that preserved existing power relationships while reclassifying them as imperial appointments. The outcome, each time, was the same. The structure survived. The origin was deprecated. What appeared in the record afterward was a Muscovite official, or a Russian subject, or an imperial appointee, holding jurisdiction over land. His grandfather had administered under a title. The new paperwork did not translate, because translation would have raised a question. The framework had no instrument to process. This is the motive, and it was never malice. Expanding administrative systems do not destroy what they absorb. They reclassify it. The steppe elites who entered Muscovite service brought with them local legitimacy, existing networks of obligation, and knowledge of terrain and population that no centrally dispatched bureaucrat could replicate in under a decade. The system needed what they carried. It had no category for what they were, so it issued them a category. It did have service, noble, military commander, regional administrator, and the prior designation was not erased so much as it was made administratively invisible. Invisible does not mean gone. The ring does not disappear because the document doesn't mention it. The land does not change because the grant reissues it under a new name. The authority does not dissolve because the title has been Cyrillicized into something a Moscow clerk could file without confusion. Deprecation is not destruction. That distinction is the center of everything here. Destruction leaves absence. Deprecation leaves a record that functions, that answers every administrative question put to it, while the knowledge required to read it correctly is quietly, efficiently, completely lost. Somewhere in Fond 1209, in a document catalogued as incomplete, a family's history ends mid-sentence. The clerk who stopped writing did not think he was ending anything. He was simply done for the day. What happened to the knowledge that was never written down at all? What survived is a name in a registry that doesn't match its origin. Not a monument, not a chronicle. A line of Cyrillic script in the Velvet Book of 1682 in a section reserved for families whose ancestry required explanation and received, in most cases, exactly one sentence of it. The physical document is held at the Russian State Historical Archive in St. Petersburg, catalogued under the classification system established in 1834 on hand-pressed rag paper that has survived 3 centuries of institutional reorganization, 2 revolutions, and at least 1 wartime evacuation. It is legible, it is preserved, it is, by every custodial measure, intact. What it cannot tell you is what the family knew about themselves that did not survive the rewriting, the oral record that preceded the Cyrillic entry. The network of obligation and memory that the ring represented and the document compressed into 11 words. The Velvet Book records the name. It does not record what the name meant to the people who carried it before a clerk was handed it across a wooden table in a Moscow administrative office sometime in the late 17th century and asked to make it legible to the imperial filing system. That context was not confiscated. It was simply not requested. And what is not requested is not recorded. And what is not recorded, across enough generations, becomes unrecoverable. You were born the grandson of a Khan. By the time your grandchildren are grown, the word Khan does not appear in any document associated with your family. Your grandchildren are Russian nobles. They are also something else, something the record around them shows, in outlines, in tax exemptions without legal basis, in jurisdictional boundaries that match no Muscovite survey, in titles that persist past their institutional context, like words in a language no one has formally agreed to stop speaking. They are the outline of a continuity that the system processed without understanding and preserved without intending to. That is what the Velvet Book shows, if you read it slowly enough. Not hidden power, not secret lineage, the shape of something that was too embedded to remove and too inconvenient to explain, held in place by the same administrative efficiency that was supposed to have replaced it. The evidence was not destroyed. It was processed through a framework that had no designation for what it was, no instrument for what it meant, and no budget for what it would have cost to understand it. Across a 300-year window, the genealogical attention, the administrative curiosity, and the simple human decision to ask what the prior arrangement actually was, none of it materialized in time. A line of Cyrillic in a registry that doesn't match its origin remains. And if you read it carefully enough, it tells you exactly how a civilization disappears. Not through fire, not through conquest, through the ordinary, efficient, completely mundane act of a clerk, finishing his entry and moving on to the next name.